When people think of strength, they typically imagine large muscles, heavy weights, and physical force. But the truth is, strength is not simply a muscular phenomenon. It's primarily a neurological one. Long before your muscles grow, your brain and nervous system must first learn how to activate and coordinate those muscles efficiently. The nervous system is the command center. Muscles are just the machinery. Without optimal signaling from the brain and spinal cord, even the most powerful muscles will fail to generate meaningful force. Understanding this is foundational to building strength correctly, because if you're only focused on lifting heavier weights without understanding the neural circuitry involved, you're leaving most of your potential untapped and possibly setting yourself up for injury. Strength begins in the central nervous system, or CNS. This includes your brain and spinal cord. When you decide to move, say, to do a squat, deadlift, or pull-up, your brain sends signals down your spinal cord, which then communicates with specific motor neurons. These motor neurons innervate muscle fibers and tell them to contract. However, this process is not a simple on-off switch. It's complex and requires precision, timing, coordination, and recruitment of the correct motor units. Motor units are the smallest functional units of movement and strength. A motor unit consists of a single motor neuron and all the muscle fibers it innervates. The body has many motor units, and they vary in size and function. Some are responsible for fine motor control, like those in your fingers, while others handle gross motor actions, like those in your legs or back. When we talk about building strength, we are especially interested in the high-threshold motor units. These are the ones responsible for generating high force, and they are typically only recruited during intense effort or heavy resistance. The brain does not immediately recruit high-threshold motor units when you start lifting a weight. It follows something known as the Henneman size principle. This principle states that motor units are recruited in order of increasing size, meaning small. Low force motor units are recruited first. As the demand for force increases, the body recruits larger and more powerful units. This means if you're training with too light of a load, you may never activate the high-threshold motor units necessary for real strength gains. This brings us to a critical point. Your nervous system adapts to the demands you place on it. This is the basis of neural adaptation, and it's the reason why beginners often get significantly stronger in the first few weeks of resistance training without seeing any noticeable increase in muscle size. During this time, your nervous system becomes more efficient at activating motor units. It improves your ability to synchronize firing patterns, reduce co-contraction of antagonistic muscles which oppose the movement, and optimize intermuscular coordination. In fact, some studies have shown that as much as 90% of early strength gains are neural, not muscular. This highlights why proper technique, mental engagement, and structured repetition are so critical, especially in the early stages of strength training. If your brain learns to perform a movement with poor mechanics, those inefficient patterns get embedded into the nervous system, making them harder to unlearn later. An important feature of this system is myelination. Myelin is a fatty sheath that insulates neurons and allows electrical signals to travel faster. When you repeatedly perform a motor task, especially with high focus and intent, your nervous system increases myelination along the specific pathways involved in that task. This is known as neuronal wiring, and it's one of the ways your brain gets better at sending fast, accurate signals to your muscles. This is why focused, intentional repetition matters more than mindlessly doing sets and reps. You're not just working your muscles, you're literally rewiring your brain for strength. We can also look at cortical involvement, specifically the motor cortex, cerebellum, and basal ganglia. The motor cortex is responsible for initiating voluntary movement. The cerebellum refines those movements, particularly with timing and coordination. The basal ganglia help automate movement patterns and regulate effort. All of these brain structures work together during strength training. When you deliberately focus on form, tempo, and contraction quality, you are actively engaging and enhancing these brain regions. This neural aspect of strength training also intersects deeply with neurochemistry. Neurotransmitters such as dopamine, acetylcholine, and norepinephrine play a critical role in strength development. Dopamine, often associated with reward, is also crucial for motivation and effort. High dopamine tone increases drive, intensity, and willingness to push through discomfort. This is one reason why strength athletes benefit from focusing on a clear goal or emotionally compelling outcome. If your dopamine circuits are engaged, your effort level will be higher and your neural circuits more plastic, meaning they're more capable of adapting and improving. Acetylcholine, on the other hand, is involved in motor neuron transmission and muscular activation. It helps convert the electrical signals from the brain into muscle contractions at the neuromuscular junction. Efficient cholinergic transmission can enhance reaction time, coordination, and power output. Some strategies, like choline, rich nutrition, or sufficient sleep, can help optimize this neurotransmitter. Norepinephrine plays a role in arousal and focus. When your locus coeruleus, a structure in the brainstem, releases norepinephrine, your brain becomes more alert and task-focused. This is useful when performing maximal lifts or complex movements that require precision under load. However, too much norepinephrine, such as when you're anxious or overly stimulated, can impair motor control, which is why managing arousal is essential during training. This is one reason elite lifters use breath control, visualization, or even music to regulate their neurophysiological state before big lifts. All of these neural components can be trained deliberately. One protocol involves velocity-based training (VBT), where the emphasis is on moving submaximal weights as fast as possible. This approach targets the nervous system's ability to generate force quickly, something referred to as rate of force development, RFD. RFD is largely neural and essential for athletic movements like sprinting, jumping, or changing direction. Even if you're not an athlete, training RFD helps your nervous system become more efficient at rapid, powerful contractions. Another method to enhance neural drive is cluster sets. These are sets broken into smaller subsets with brief intraset rest. For example, instead of doing 5 reps straight, you might do 2 reps, rest 10 seconds, then do 2 more, and so on. This format allows the nervous system to partially recover between efforts, letting you produce higher force and reinforce neural patterns without excessive fatigue. You should also consider interleaving skill and strength. Interleaving is a learning technique where you mix different but related tasks during a session, for example, pairing a heavy squat with a reactive jump. This engages different neural circuits, improves motor learning, and increases adaptability. Neuroscientific studies show that interleaved practice leads to more durable skill acquisition than blocked practice, where one task is repeated over and over. Additionally, visualization and mental rehearsal can be powerful neural tools. Studies in neuroplasticity have shown that mentally rehearsing a lift with high focus activates many of the same brain regions as physically performing it. This primes the nervous system, reinforces motor patterns, and can improve performance even in the absence of physical movement. Olympic lifters, gymnasts, and high-performance athletes use this regularly. A good mental rep is like a low-cost neural warm-up. The brain's plasticity, its ability to change in response to experience, also means that strength is trainable across the lifespan, including well into older age. While sarcopenia, muscle loss, and reduced testosterone are often blamed for strength decline, a significant part of age-related strength loss is neural. The firing rate of motor neurons slows, motor unit recruitment becomes less efficient, and coordination declines. But targeted strength training, especially involving compound lifts, explosive movements, and sufficient load, can reverse many of these neural deficits. In other words, strength is not just preserved through aging. It is retrainable because the nervous system retains plasticity well into late adulthood. In practical terms, this means your strength training program should not just be about sets, reps, and muscle groups. It should include elements that optimize neural drive, enhance motor learning, and regulate neurochemical tone. That might involve lifting heavy with excellent form and intent to recruit height, threshold motor units using fast, explosive lifts like kettlebell swings or medicine ball, throws to train rate of force development, practicing movement skills under mild fatigue, to enhance neural endurance, pairing training with focused breath work and visualization to prime cortical engagement, sleeping 7-9 hours per night, as deep sleep is essential for neural recovery and motor memory consolidation. All of these strategies reinforce the core idea. Building strength is building brain-body integration. The brain tells the muscles what to do, when to do it, and how forcefully to contract. Without training the brain, without respecting the neural basis of strength, you're essentially training in the dark. In sum, strength is first and foremost a neural phenomenon. It emerges from the complex interaction between motor neurons, neurotransmitters, cortical structures, and peripheral nerves. When you train for strength, you are not just shaping your body. You are sculpting your nervous system. And that system, unlike muscle alone, governs everything from performance and coordination to resilience and adaptability. To build strength correctly, you must train your nervous system with intention, intelligence, and precision. When we speak about building real, lasting strength, one of the most overlooked yet foundational principles is the concept of motor unit recruitment specifically. How to properly train the body to activate the most powerful motor units that are responsible for maximal force production. Most people approach strength training with a narrow focus on muscle growth, which is certainly important for size, aesthetics, and support. But strength, pure functional strength, requires training the nervous system to recruit the right motor units at the right time and with the right intensity. Every voluntary muscle contraction originates with a signal sent from the brain through the spinal cord to a specific set of motor neurons. These motor neurons, in turn, activate muscle fibers. Each motor neuron, along with all the muscle fibers it innervates, forms a motor unit. These units vary in size and function. Small motor units control fine motor skills and are composed of slow twitch muscle fibers, which are resistant to fatigue but not capable of producing high force. In contrast, large motor units, often referred to as high threshold motor units, consist of fast twitch muscle fibers. These are capable of generating explosive power and maximal strength, but they fatigue quickly. To train with the intention of building strength correctly, you must target and recruit these high threshold motor units consistently and effectively. However, the body doesn't automatically recruit them unless there is a demand. It operates under the size principle, a foundational concept in neuromuscular physiology. According to the size principle, motor units are recruited in an orderly fashion, from smallest and lowest threshold, used for light tasks, to largest and highest threshold, used only when high force or high speed is required. This means that low-intensity activities, even if performed repetitively, may never stimulate the high-threshold motor units. Without the deliberate application of high intensity, your strongest motor units will stay dormant. For example, performing 20 reps with light weights will primarily activate small, low threshold motor units. These are important for endurance, posture, and daily activities, but they won't build the type of strength necessary for sprinting, jumping, or lifting heavy objects. On the other hand, when you perform a squat or deadlift at 85–95% of your 1 repetition maximum 1 RM, or accelerate a submaximal load as fast as possible, your nervous system is forced to recruit the high threshold motor units to meet the demand. This is where real strength development occurs, not simply because the muscle is under stress, but because the nervous system is being pushed to activate its full capacity. Training these motor units is both a science and a practice. It involves not only lifting heavy weights, but also moving with intention, speed, and focus. For instance, explosive movements such as Olympic lifts, jump squats, and kettlebell swings are particularly effective for teaching the nervous system to recruit high threshold units rapidly. Even when the load is relatively light, if the intent is maximal velocity, the body will respond by activating motor units capable of producing the necessary force quickly. This is referred to as rate coding, the frequency at which motor neurons fire action potentials to their respective muscle fibers. When the brain sends rapid and repeated signals, force production increases dramatically. Therefore, both the number of motor units recruited and the firing rate contribute to strength. There's also an important concept in neuroscience known as synchronization. This refers to the coordinated firing of multiple motor units at the same time. When you're new to strength training, your motor units tend to fire less synchronously. They are scattered, inefficient, and poorly timed. But with deliberate training, especially using compound, high-resistance lifts like squats, bench presses, and deadlifts, the nervous system learns to synchronize those units. The result is a dramatic increase in force production with relatively modest increases in muscle size. This is one of the reasons trained lifters can lift far more than untrained individuals of the same body weight. Their strength isn't just muscular, it's neurological. To train motor unit recruitment effectively, the load and effort must be high. This doesn't mean every session must be maximal. In fact, overtraining the nervous system with constant max effort can lead to fatigue, burnout, and injury. The goal is to stimulate, not annihilate. A practical guideline is to train at 80–90% of your 1 RM for sets of 3–5 reps with excellent form. This range provides enough intensity to recruit high threshold motor units without excessive fatigue or loss of movement quality. That said, intent matters as much as load. Lifting a moderate weight with maximal speed and intent to move explosively can also recruit these units effectively. This is especially useful for athletes who want to increase power without adding too much muscular bulk. Another powerful method is post-activation potentiation (PAP). PAP refers to the short-term improvement in muscular performance following a high-intensity contraction. For example, if you perform a heavy set of squats at 85–90% of your 1 RM, and then immediately perform a set of jump squats or sprints, the nervous system is already primed. The high threshold motor units have been activated, and their responsiveness is temporarily elevated. This allows you to move faster, jump higher, or contract more forcefully in the subsequent explosive task. This technique is particularly valuable in sports performance settings, but is equally effective in general strength training when programmed properly. Equally important is the role of time under tension and fatigue management. When you perform high rep sets to failure, fatigue may eventually recruit high threshold motor units, but only after the lower threshold ones are exhausted. This process can be effective, especially for hypertrophy, but it's less efficient for developing maximal strength. Why? Because the quality of contraction deteriorates as fatigue sets in. When your tired technique breaks down, motor unit recruitment becomes erratic, and the ability to produce maximal force decreases. In contrast, low-rep, high-intensity sets allow for better quality contractions and more precise motor unit recruitment, especially when sufficient rest is given between sets, typically 2 to 5 minutes depending on the lift and the load. Motor unit recruitment is also movement-specific. Your brain learns to activate motor units in a pattern that matches the movement being trained. This is why specificity is so critical. If you want to get stronger at pull-ups, you must do pull-ups, not just lat pull-downs or curls. If you want to improve your squat, you must squat frequently and with full attention to mechanics. Repetition builds neural efficiency, and efficiency breeds force. Over time, your brain becomes better at selecting and activating the exact motor units needed for a specific task. This is the essence of neural patterning. Your body learns what you ask it to repeat. There's also a deep interaction between motor unit recruitment and cortical control, meaning the parts of the brain that are consciously involved in movement. Studies using EEG and fMRI have shown that the more focused and mentally engaged a person is during a lift, the more activity is observed in the motor cortex, premotor areas, and cerebellum. This implies that attention, visualization, and conscious intent can enhance motor unit recruitment. Simply put, when your brain is fully engaged, your nervous system performs better. This also underscores the role of mental fatigue in performance. If you're distracted, mentally drained, or sleep deprived, your ability to recruit high threshold motor units will be compromised, even if your muscles feel fresh. Breathing patterns and vagal tone also influence neural recruitment. The vagus nerve, which interfaces with the parasympathetic nervous system, plays a role in recovery and autonomic balance. During strength training, sympathetic arousal, the fight response increases, which helps with focus and power. However, between sets, deliberate slow breathing and physiological sighs, rapid double inhales followed by long exhales, can return the nervous system to a more balanced state, reducing unnecessary fatigue and allowing for better performance in the next set. This rhythmic oscillation between sympathetic activation and parasympathetic recovery is how elite lifters maintain neural readiness across long, intense sessions. Nutrition and micronutrients also affect motor unit recruitment. Electrolytes, particularly sodium, potassium, calcium, and magnesium, are vital for action potential propagation in neurons. Deficiencies in these minerals can impair neuromuscular signaling and reduce the efficiency of motor unit activation. Similarly, choline, a precursor to the neurotransmitter acetylcholine, is essential for communication between motor neurons and muscle fibers at the neuromuscular junction. Ensuring adequate intake through diet or supplementation can support more effective muscle activation. Sleep plays a unique and non-negotiable role. During slow, wave sleep, the brain consolidates motor memories and reinforces the patterns created during training. This process is called offline learning and is essential for long-term motor unit recruitment improvements. Without sufficient sleep, especially deep sleep, neural adaptations are impaired. Even one night of poor sleep can reduce reaction time, impair coordination, and diminish force output. Lastly, consider the impact of consistency and patience. Training high threshold motor units is not something that happens in a week. These adaptations are subtle and cumulative. It can take several weeks or months of focused training to fully engage and optimize motor unit recruitment. The nervous system operates on a longer timescale than muscles when it comes to learning, efficiency, and coordination. But once these neural pathways are built, they are durable. They provide a foundation of strength that supports not only performance, but also resilience and injury prevention for years to come. So, when we talk about training with proper motor unit recruitment, we're not just referring to lifting heavy weights. We are referring to a neurological process that requires deliberate practice, proper intensity, mental focus, rest, and recovery. You're training your brain to command your body with more precision, power, and consistency. Every rep is a signal. Every set is a lesson, and over time, your nervous system learns not only how to lift, but how to recruit strength from deep within the body's most powerful fibers. That's how real strength is built correctly, sustainably, and neurologically. When most people think about strength training, their attention typically goes to muscles, how big they are, how defined they look, how sore they feel after training. But if we step back and look through the lens of neuroscience and motor learning, we see a very different and far more accurate picture. Strength at its core is not merely a function of muscle tissue. Strength is a skill, a highly trainable, highly adaptable neurological pattern. And just like any skill, whether it's playing a musical instrument, learning a language, or throwing a perfect spiral, true mastery depends on how well the nervous system learns, remembers, and executes movement under different conditions. Let's break this down from a scientific and physiological standpoint. Every voluntary movement originates in the central nervous system. In the brain, specifically the motor cortex, a signal is generated based on a goal. Lift this object, extend this joint, move this limb. That signal is relayed through the brainstem and spinal cord to motor neurons, which innervate muscle fibers. The strength of the muscle contraction depends not only on the size and number of the motor units recruited, but also on the coordination, timing, and precision of those neural signals. That's the key. The brain doesn't just tell the muscles to contract. It tells them when to contract, how fast, how hard, and in what sequence. This is why someone with relatively modest muscle mass, but years of consistent strength training, can outperform a bigger, less trained individual. Their nervous system is simply better at executing the movement patterns required for strength. This includes the ability to stabilize joints, maintain efficient mechanics, activate agonist muscles while inhibiting antagonists, and generate maximum force in minimum time. All of these things are learned responses. They are skills. In neuroscience, we refer to this type of learning as motor learning, and it occurs in a process similar to how we acquire any new behavior. At first, the movement feels awkward, slow, inefficient. Neural circuits in the brain are being activated for the first time in novel combinations. But with repetition and feedback, the brain begins to refine the movement. Through synaptic plasticity, certain neurons fire together more easily. With enough exposure, the circuit becomes more efficient. This is called myelination, where the pathways between neurons are insulated to allow faster and more accurate transmission of electrical signals. Essentially, practice builds a stronger brain-to-muscle connection, and it's this connection, this refined circuit, that makes strength feel fluid and powerful. Understanding strength as a skill also reframes how we should approach training. Instead of thinking only about volume and load, we begin to emphasize quality of movement, precision, and intention. Each repetition becomes a neural rehearsal, an opportunity for the brain to refine the execution of force. The more perfect the rep, the more valuable it is from a neurological standpoint. That's why greasing the groove, a term popularized by strength coaches like Pavel Tsatsouline, works so well. By performing a movement frequently with submaximal effort and perfect form, you teach the nervous system to become more efficient at it. It's like practicing piano scales or free throws, low fatigue, high frequency, high precision. The implications of this are massive. It means that beginners should focus not on how heavy they can lift, but on how well they can move. The early stages of strength development are mostly neurological. Up to 90% of initial strength gains in novices are due to improved motor unit recruitment, synchronization, and neural drive, not muscle growth. This is why you might see a new lifter double their squat in a matter of weeks without gaining much size. Their brain is simply getting better at solving the problem of lifting, and like all skills, strength training benefits enormously from deliberate practice. Deliberate practice is defined by focused attention, goal setting, immediate feedback, and continuous refinement. A mindless set of curls while watching TV is not deliberate practice, but a set of heavy deadlifts performed with complete mental engagement, controlled breathing, and technical precision, where every part of the lift is analyzed and corrected. That's neural training at its highest level. Furthermore, the variability of training stimuli plays a central role in developing the skill of strength. The brain learns not just from repetition, but from solving slightly varied problems. If you always train under identical conditions, same tempo, same stance, same grip, the nervous system adapts narrowly. But if you occasionally introduce small variations, a slightly slower eccentric, a pause at the bottom, a change in bar position, the brain must relearn the movement under a slightly different context. This expands your neural map and makes your strength more adaptable and robust. This concept is supported by what's known as the challenge point hypothesis in motor learning research. It states that learning is maximized when the difficulty of the task is matched to the performer's skill level. Too easy, and the nervous system doesn't adapt. Too hard, and the learner becomes overwhelmed and reverts to inefficient patterns. Optimal learning occurs when the nervous system is challenged just beyond its current capability, forcing adaptation without breakdown. This is why intelligent programming matters. Progressive overload, yes, but also progressive complexity. There is also an underappreciated role of reflexive control in strength as a skill. Many aspects of strength involve subconscious, automatic reactions to load and instability. For instance, when performing a heavy squat, your brain must reflexively engage the stabilizers of your hips, knees, and spine. This reflexive strength is trained not by brute force, but by high-skill movements under load. Olympic lifts, for example, require massive amounts of reflexive coordination, which is why they are often used to train power and athleticism, even though the loads may be lighter than in pure powerlifting. Importantly, mental rehearsal can enhance the learning of strength-based skills. There's solid evidence from sports psychology and neuroscience that mentally visualizing a lift activates many of the same neural circuits as actually performing the lift. This process, called motor imagery, primes the brain for future execution. Athletes and elite performers use this technique to rehearse complex motor patterns, refine timing, and reduce anxiety. If you're working on a technical lift, mentally rehearsing the perfect rep, feeling the setup, the tension, the bar path, can accelerate skill acquisition even in the absence of physical movement. Beyond training itself, neurological recovery is essential for skill development. The brain, just like the body, needs rest in order to consolidate motor learning. During slow, wave sleep, the brain replays and strengthens the neural patterns formed during training. This is called offline consolidation. Disrupting this process through poor sleep, stress, or overtraining can impair the brain's ability to retain and refine movement skills. This is why skill-based strength training is best supported by 7 to 9 hours of quality sleep and periods of deliberate rest between sessions. Neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to change and adapt, is modulated by specific neuromodulators such as acetylcholine, dopamine, and norepinephrine. These chemicals signal the brain that something important is happening and that it should pay attention. Intense focus during a training session increases the release of these modulators, helping encode new motor patterns. The same chemicals are released during emotionally engaging or rewarding experiences. This is why training with a sense of purpose, challenge, and motivation leads to better skill acquisition. It's also why training environments matter. A setting that promotes focus, feedback, and autonomy stimulates more adaptive changes in the brain. Another factor to consider is the rate of skill degradation. Unlike muscle mass, which can be retained for weeks or months with minimal training, neurological strength adaptations degrade more rapidly. Coordination, timing, and neural efficiency are use it or lose it qualities. If you stop practicing a skill-based movement for several weeks, performance can drop significantly. This doesn't mean you need to train hard every day, but it does mean you should revisit key movements regularly, even at low intensity, to keep the neural circuits sharp. Strength as a skill also applies across lifespan. As we age, there is a natural decline in neural drive and motor unit recruitment. However, this decline is not inevitable. Research shows that older adults who engage in skill-based strength training emphasizing coordination, balance, and compound movement can maintain high levels of neural function and reduce fall risk, frailty, and cognitive decline. In this way, strength training becomes a form of neurological therapy, preserving both brain and body function over time. Lastly, viewing strength through a neurological lens helps us move beyond the simplistic binary of strong versus weak. It invites a more nuanced understanding. Are you skilled in the movements you train? Is your nervous system fluent in the language of force? Are your muscles just big, or are they expertly coordinated by a high-functioning brain? When you train for skill, every rep becomes a learning opportunity. Every lift is a conversation between your brain and your body, a chance to refine not just movement, but precision, awareness, and control. This shift in mindset, from muscle to movement, from brute strength to skilled strength, is what separates average trainees from elite performers. It's also what makes training a lifelong, engaging, and evolving practice. You're not just building a stronger body. You're building a smarter one. You're not just stacking plates. You're sculpting neural architecture. And that ultimately is the essence of strength, a refined neurological language spoken fluently between brain and muscle. Strength development is often associated with the phrase progressive overload. In most fitness discussions, this is reduced to a basic concept: lift more weight over time and your body will get stronger. While this holds some truth, it grossly oversimplifies what's actually a profound neurological and biological process. Progressive overload is not just about adding weight to the bar. At its core, it's about signaling, about sending the nervous system and the body the right kinds of information to trigger adaptation. And that signaling is governed by the brain's interpretation of stress, intensity, frequency, and novelty. The process of adaptation, whether muscular, neural, or metabolic, is driven by inputs. These inputs are interpreted by the nervous system and hormonal axes as meaningful or insignificant. To create adaptation, you need meaningful input, what the nervous system perceives as a challenge, a disruption, or a stimulus worthy of change. This is where we begin to look at progressive overload not as brute force, but as neuroscience. It's not the strain itself that causes change, but the biological signal created by that strain. And if the signal isn't strong enough, clear enough, or sufficiently different from the baseline, the body will simply conserve energy and maintain the status quo. When you expose the body to a new physical demand, say, lifting a heavier weight than before, or performing more reps with the same weight, several neural and hormonal systems get activated. The mechanoreceptors in your muscles, tendons, and fascia detect increased tension. These receptors send signals to the central nervous system via afferent nerves, alerting the brain that the physical load is greater than what it's accustomed to. Simultaneously, catecholamines like norepinephrine and epinephrine spike, increasing alertness and arousal. Dopamine also plays a critical role, reinforcing the novelty of the experience and marking it for plasticity, essentially telling the brain, pay attention, this is important. Now, if that signal crosses a certain threshold of novelty or intensity, without being so overwhelming that it causes system shutdown. The body initiates processes to cope more efficiently in future. In the context of strength training, this may mean increasing motor unit recruitment efficiency, enhancing synaptic transmission speed, improving movement coordination, or synthesizing more contractile proteins. But, and this is crucial, none of this happens unless the signal is loud and clear. A training session without sufficient novelty, intensity, or volume is simply noise, not signal. This is why progressive overload is not just about adding weight. It's about changing the signal in a way that the brain recognizes as adaptation worthy. You can do this by manipulating many variables: volume, sets and reps, intensity, load, frequency, how often you train a movement, range of motion, tempo, speed of movement, time under tension, and exercise complexity. Each of these alters the neurological and hormonal signal sent to the brain. Let's take a practical example. If you bench press 185 pounds for 5 sets of 5 reps every Monday for 6 months without changing anything, you might feel like you're working hard, but from a signaling standpoint, your nervous system has long since adapted. The movement is familiar, the tension predictable, the metabolic demand known. The signal gets quieter with each session. But introduce novelty, say, pause reps, a slower eccentric phase, or chains that vary resistance through the range of motion. And suddenly the nervous system must reevaluate. This re-engagement creates the internal conditions for adaptation. One of the most misunderstood aspects of progressive overload is that it doesn't need to be linear. In fact, in biological systems, it rarely is. Linear increases in load, adding 5 pounds every week, can work for beginners, but the nervous system eventually stops interpreting those small increments as meaningful. That's why more advanced trainees benefit from wave loading, undulating periodization, or conjugate programming, where the stimulus changes in a patterned yet variable way. These methods maintain signal novelty while still pushing adaptation. This is supported by the neuroscience of predictive coding, a model of brain function which suggests that the brain is constantly making predictions about incoming sensory inputs and updating those predictions based on what actually occurs. If your training sessions are too predictable, the brain anticipates the load and stops adjusting. But if you present it with variation within a framework of safety and intention, the brain stays engaged, continuously updating its internal models, and adaptation persists. There's also the concept of sufficient dose. The body doesn't adapt to low levels of stress if it doesn't deem them threatening or costly enough. This is related to the minimum effective dose med in training, the smallest dose that will still trigger adaptation. But it must also be balanced with maximum recoverable volume MRV, the most stimulus you can effectively recover from. The nervous system governs both of these. If a session creates just enough stress to push the system slightly beyond its current limits without exceeding recovery capacity, adaptation is likely. If the stimulus is too small, no change occurs. If it's too great, the nervous system may enter a protective mode, blunting performance, reducing motivation, and elevating stress hormones like cortisol, which can impair muscle repair and plasticity. An essential insight from this model is that subjective intensity matters: how hard the set feels, how focused you are, how connected you are to the movement. The rate of perceived exertion, RPE, and reps in reserve, RER systems are attempts to quantify internal load. From a neuroscience perspective, the degree of effort and focus during a movement alters neuromodulator release, especially dopamine and acetylcholine, which influence motor learning and plasticity. The more focused and deliberate your effort, the more robust the signal. This is why two athletes lifting the same weight might experience drastically different outcomes. one is going through the motions. The other is neurologically and psychologically engaged. The brain of the second athlete interprets the stimulus as more meaningful and therefore adapts more. Rest intervals also influence the adaptation signal. Short rest may increase metabolic stress and cardiovascular demand, while long rest enhances neuromuscular recovery and maximal force output. Changing rest periods, then, alters the internal environment in which adaptation occurs. A heavy triple with 3 minutes of rest sends a different message than a high rep set with 30 seconds of rest, even if the total volume is similar. Progressive overload also applies to the support systems around training: sleep, nutrition, breathwork, mindset. For example, inadequate sleep impairs the consolidation of motor skills and reduces growth hormone output. If the nervous system is not allowed to recover, the signal from training can't be properly interpreted or stored. Nutrition affects this too: protein synthesis, glycogen availability, micronutrients like magnesium and zinc that support nerve conduction and enzymatic repair processes. Each of these amplifies or diminishes the signal sent by training. Let's also explore the idea of psychological novelty. The human brain responds to novelty with increased dopamine output. Novelty sharpens attention and primes the hippocampus for memory formation. In training, introducing new elements, even if they're not mechanically harder, can increase cognitive engagement, enhance neuromodulator release, and deepen learning. This could mean a new environment, a different tool, e.g., kettlebells instead of barbells, or a novel breathing technique. If it's unfamiliar but manageable, it reactivates the brain's learning systems and signals adaptation. One of the best demonstrations of progressive overload as neuroscience is the repeated bout effect. This is the observation that a given training stimulus becomes less damaging and less stimulatory over time. After performing a novel exercise, say, walking lunges, you might experience severe DOMS, delayed onset, muscle soreness the first time. But perform the same session 2 weeks later and you're barely sore. What changed? The movement was the same, the load identical. The answer lies in neural adaptation. The brain and body have learned to anticipate and counteract the stimulus. This learning reduces the perceived threat, and therefore the adaptation signal is blunted. To keep growing, you need to introduce a new variation, a different stride length, a loaded backpack, an incline. This has profound implications for injury prevention as well. Chronic overload without intelligent variation leads to neural desensitization, followed by tissue fatigue, which eventually results in breakdown. The brain stops listening to the repetitive signal and focuses attention elsewhere, just as we tune out background noise. By introducing variability, managing fatigue, and cycling stress, we maintain a high-quality signal that continues to drive safe, effective adaptation. Finally, we should touch on autoregulation, a system of training where daily readiness dictates load and volume. This is the application of neuroscience in real time. Instead of forcing progression based on a rigid calendar, you train based on your nervous system's current state, measured via heart rate variability, bar speed, mood, or motivation. These indicators reflect the autonomic and central nervous system status. On high readiness days, you push harder. On low readiness days, you deload or focus on technique. This not only protects against overtraining, but also ensures that the adaptation signal is received when the system is most receptive. In the end, the concept of progressive overload must evolve from its mechanical roots into a more integrated biological understanding. Yes, muscles respond to stress, but the orchestrator of that response is the nervous system. The nervous system decides what's threatening, what's novel, what's worth adapting to. It does this based on inputs, internal and external. If we understand this, we can train smarter. We can use tools like variation, deliberate practice, load manipulation, focus, recovery, and novelty to send more powerful and more consistent adaptation signals. You are not just lifting weights, you are creating electrical signals interpreted by the most sophisticated computational system in the known universe, your brain. And the more intelligently you craft those signals, the more robust and sustainable your adaptations will be. Progressive overload is not just a workout strategy, it is neuroscience in motion.